We built a K-8 school focused on folk arts because we wanted to change the world, at least starting with our little slice of it in Philadelphia's Chinatown. So, what do folk arts have to do with changing the world? And what does folk arts education have to do with you? Well, when I was a child, I wanted my eyes to look different. I knew that I looked like the enemy and never the hero in the war movies on TV. And I knew that we were supposed to be cheering for higher and higher death counts of our enemy in Vietnam, and that they also looked like me. I didn't have words for any of this because nobody talked about it. But I didn't need somebody to call me a racial slur for me to feel unseen and less than. It wasn't until I was 15 that I first learned that my parents had been incarcerated in America's concentration camps in World War II. And I learned this not from my school and not from my parents, who at the time were still shamed and silenced by it. I learned it from a leaflet that somebody thrust in my hands. But at that moment, my hatred of my Asianness stopped. Because for the first time in my life, I could see that this self-hatred I had nothing to do with something wrong with me. Had to do with how society was viewing a whole people, my people, and I could see that that was unjust. I went from being a silent child, tried to be as small and as invisible as I possibly could be, to becoming a questioning and outspoken teenager. For my world to shift like this, I didn't need my teachers to do away with racism or have the answers to these massive questions. But what I did need was a chance to learn something real about myself. I needed to see that my own, my family's, my community's stories were worthy of telling and worthy of study. Would have been nice if this had happened for me in school. It didn't. Fast forward 50 years, these issues of silencing and invisibility are still there. For Asian children, Black children, immigrant, Latinx, Arab, Indigenous, gay, trans. And we need for these diverse stories and perspectives to be valued and visible also to those who aren't the targets of these particular oppressions, because without it, their own stories about themselves and their communities are skewed, and they are lacking. They're lacking in the understanding that they need to have to develop a healthier relationship to their role in society. Standing here in this half-broken world, what do we as educators seek for our students? Seems to me that if our world is to survive, we need children to grow up with a sense of compassion, a love of justice, feelings of belonging and connectedness to others. And at the root of all of those capacities is the child's knowledge and love of self. 20 years ago, our small Asian American community group started to imagine, what if we do more than protest what's wrong with schools? What if we build a school that would cultivate those very capacities of compassion, love of justice, and sense of self needed to strengthen the communities that our students come from, and that could propel them to be stronger forces for change in society? And as we dreamed of this school that would change the world, we came to an unlikely conclusion. It should be a folk arts school. What if schools treated our families and communities, their knowledge, wisdom, and traditions as the cultural treasures that they are? What if we valued the community traditions that have so long been sources of community resilience? What forces of social transformation could we unleash then?
If you and I both slowed down to look deeply at our personal experiences on something ordinary, like cooking breakfast, celebrating a holiday, remembering a loved one who has died, and we listen deeply as we share our memories of these experiences with each other, we discover that what might appear on the surface to be similarities, we all remember our dead, contains rich and important complexities of variations and differences You send messages on the burning incense smoke, and I put small rocks on the gravestone. This simple, basic process of slow looking and listening is called me to we, and it's easily done in any classroom, not just a folk arts education school. Each tradition is thus validated. Every voice can be heard. The door for understanding ourselves and respecting others, their knowledge, and their traditions is open. Your way is not my way, but it's not wrong. Students begin to gain a more complex understanding of the inherent equality of all people and cultures and a greater respect for themselves and those around them. Every student's life is a rich resource for discovery and learning. So too are the experiences of community members. We open the schoolhouse door wide and invite in community knowledge and ways of knowing, sometimes through students exploring their family knowledge, like in our social studies foodways unit, and sometimes through bringing in an artist to share their art form or tradition. For example, every year, Mexican visual artist Veronica Ponce de Leon shares her Day of the Dead traditions with FACT's 5th and 7th graders. This project includes a me to we exploration of students' remembrance traditions, asking the students to share how they honor and recall family members who have died. At first, students may think their family doesn't have any traditions, but slowly as the sharing starts, they realize, oh, we have an altar where we put food too, or every year we go clean the gravesite, or we tell stories about grandpa, or we cook the special soup and talk about how grandma used to make it. In fact style, the students do this to show that they are connecting with a classmate's contribution. The we part is a chance to connect our own experiences with those of others and to notice both the similarities and the differences. The concentric circles of me to we learning, from their own experience to their classmates to those in the community who may be very culturally different from them. It impacts students in multiple and complex ways, like knowing themselves and affirming their heritage and their place in it, developing skills for learning from and making connections to others, realizing that there are many ways of viewing and being in the world. These are SEL skills. These are life skills. Veronica guides the students in the Day of the Dead traditions that she learned in her family. The students make skeletons of a specific person, like an ancestor in their family or community, doing a very ordinary activity they like to do in the process. Students learn that they must set aside their prior knowledge of Halloween to really understand her tradition of skeleton figures as communicating layers of meaning to the makers and viewers, remembering the person who has died, acknowledging that people who like to play a sport, read, or other daily activities also die, and recognizing that regardless of our differences in life, in death, we are all equal. We are all just bones. Community-based traditions, the stories we tell, the memories passed down, the values that promote caring for the collective well-being, these embody, teach, and reinforce community and individual resilience.
We built our folk art school to change the world. We cannot solve the problems of our communities and of our world if our children are silenced by self-hatred, if they are alienated and cynical rather than passionate and engaged, or if they're pitted one against the other rather than nurtured to see their common humanity. Radical theorist Grace Lee Boggs wrote, quote, "We urgently need to bring to our communities the limitless capacity to love, serve, and create with and for each other," end quote. This must be the work of schools.